Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, Jeff Turner, and recently I got trained in trauma and violent informed care, and I thought I'd make a video sharing what I learned. So to give you some context, when I worked in peer support, the words trauma informed were everywhere. It showed up in our policies, in training decks, in meetings, but honestly, I never really knew exactly what it was or even if I was doing it correctly. Recently, a friend of mine told me about the Trauma and Violence Informed Care e-learning course from Recovery Alberta, and he had a lot of great things to say about it. Now, I don't work frontline peer support anymore, but I feel as though if I'm going to keep talking about mental wellness, about connection, about peer support, I want my tools to be sharp. So I took the training and I'm going to share what I learned, hopefully to shed some light on the topic and maybe even help you make a decision on if this training is for you. Now, this video isn't the actual training. It's not going to be a how-to. Everything I'm sharing comes from a specific course that's filtered through my own experience and perspective. So with that, let's get into it. So the first thing that I learned is, what is trauma-informed care? And here's the simplest way I can explain it. Trauma-informed care isn't a technique, it's a way of interacting with people. So it starts from the assumption that many of us, probably most of us, have experienced overwhelming stress, psychological harm, or even violence. And often we don't recognize how much those experiences are still shaping us. What a trauma-informed approach does is it asks the question, how do I reduce harm and increase safety, choice, and dignity? Not just one-to-one, but in systems, policies, spaces, and in everyday interactions. And the first thing that I noticed is, honestly, I was a little bit surprised. I am a big tools guy. If you haven't noticed, my channel is primarily about tools and experiences. So if I want to learn or get better or at something, I usually try to find the tool or the technique and I practice it. But what trauma-informed is indicating is that it's not just about what you say, it's about how entire environments are designed, how power is shared, how often people are asked to retell painful stories just to access help. And its aim is to not make things worse. The second thing I learned is, why is trauma-informed important? Something that I found interesting is that trauma and violence, they don't stay in the past. They can resurface as anxiety, depression, substance use, relationship struggles, work instability, sleep, pain, autoimmune issues, and sometimes they show up as behavior that gets labeled as difficult. And looking at this, one of the biggest shifts for me personally in this training was a simple reframe. So instead of asking what's wrong with this person, the reframe is trying to ask what might have happened to this person. This alone was maybe the most important thing for me to understand. In my opinion, one of, if not the biggest enemies of mental health is stigma. And when you can separate the person from the behavior, it gives a new perspective on what actually might be going on. And I really appreciate this perspective because it just goes to show that you don't need to be an expert. You don't need to have someone disclose their entire trauma, retell their entire story, and you don't have to know everything about them to provide support. As I said before, this is all about how you show up. The third thing that I learned were the 4 elements or the 4 R's of trauma and violence informed approach. So the training is broken into 4 elements or 4 R's. The first key element or R is called realizing. And realizing is about realizing how widespread trauma and violence actually are, how common they are, how many people carry them, and how many different ways they can show up. Basically, how I interpreted this element is you're probably not dealing with an exception when you're dealing with trauma and violence. You're dealing with the norm. Trauma and violence aren't rare events. They're not limited to certain people or certain geographical locations. They cut across age, income, cultural identity, and sometimes they don't even look like trauma. For example, something that I found interesting was withdrawal, irritability, control, numbness, perfectionism, anger, silence. These can all be a part of trauma. What realizing this taught me was to slow down and understand that reactions don't come out of nowhere. When you sit down and you look at and you realize how common these experiences are, you stop treating people's behavior like a problem, or you stop treating their behaviors even as their identity. This is important because the second key element is about recognizing. So recognizing is about recognizing trauma responses. What I found really interesting is it's not just people receiving support, but it also translates or crosses over into the people providing it. As I was doing this training, what I started to recognize about recognizing is When you're in a supporting capacity, burnout, emotional distance, and irritability are signals often associated to the cost of being exposed to other people's pain for long periods of time. So when I do a simple reframe, it's going from I should be handling this better to something here might need attention. Maybe for me it's self-care or rest or something more like therapy or even seeing a doctor. When you can recognize a trauma response for what it is, you can stop reacting to it and start responding to it. And basically recognizing trauma in the supported is as equally important as it is recognizing it in the supporter. The third key element, or the third R, is called responding. So this is about responding by integrating what you know about trauma into how you act, not just what you say, as I mentioned before. Basically, this is where the awareness turns into behavior. And what I learned most about this element is it taught me that trauma-informed approach is often less about doing more and more about doing things differently. This can be something like slowing the pace of a conversation, maybe softening your tone, or explaining, if you're in a practice or something, what's gonna come next. And sometimes it's just asking permission instead of assuming, or offering an option instead of directives. So offering the option of how a person would like to be supportive instead of telling them. And probably the biggest thing for me here is that it made me aware of the idea of choice, because trauma and violence often take choice away. So even the smallest choices can matter a lot. Things like, how would you like me to address you? Or is there something that's helped you before that might help you now? Offering someone these small choices can return the control back to the person who's being supported. And essentially, you're not trying to work on someone, you're trying to work with them. And the fourth and final key element is called resisting re-traumatization. This is about actively working to not cause harm, even unintentionally. One of the things the training made clear is that trauma isn't always caused by one big event. Sometimes it's caused by systems that prioritize efficiency over people or even events. What this element taught me is that good intentions aren't always enough. You can mean well and still do harm, especially when someone has to retell their story over and over to different people through different systems just to get the support. And that repetition, it can be re-traumatizing. Imagine having to relive and retell one of the most impactful moments, maybe negatively, in your life over and over and over again. So a reframe here to resisting re-traumatization, it's maybe about asking, could this interaction make things worse? And if the answer might be yes, then trying to find a way to adjust. Just because I, a peer support worker, have learned a tool or something, it doesn't mean that that tool or that method or my experience is going to be the thing that this person wants, needs to help them on their journey. In fact, it might even be more detrimental and damaging. So sometimes that can look like not pushing for details, not demanding disclosure, or forcing a timeline, because in a trauma-informed approach versus a trauma care approach, disclosure isn't required for someone to receive care. Safety should always come first. And that brings us to the end of the video. If you want to sharpen your support skills, I'll leave a link to where I did the training below. And if you want more on peer support, personal wellness tools, or anything to help you on your personal wellness journey, just click one of the two boxes that you see and watch the next video. Until next time, I'm Jeff Turner, and remember to take care of yourself however that looks to you.